You're not just aging in the mirror, you're aging in your silence, in the parts of you that gave up explaining, in the emotional rooms you kept entering long after they stopped listening. This kind of aging isn't about wrinkles or gray hair, it's deeper. It lives in your posture, in your hesitation, in the weight you carry when no one is watching. It's the erosion of something internal, something sacred. And the hardest part, you never meant to lose it. You just kept choosing peace over conflict, duty over self, silence over confusion, until even your own reflection stopped recognizing the man staring back. The fatigue you feel isn't just from long days or restless nights. It's from years of negotiating your worth without a single word being returned, from constantly adjusting yourself to fit a mold that never fit. You thought you were being strong. You thought holding it in was maturity. But strength isn't the absence of feeling. It's the courage to honor what you feel without letting it own you. What you called patience became quiet surrender. What you called selflessness became slow self-erasure. And now, when the world asks you what's wrong, all you can offer is a tired smile and silence. You ever hear of Zeno de Citio? He wasn't born a philosopher. He was a broken merchant, a man who lost everything in a shipwreck. And that loss, that collapse, is what pushed him toward wisdom. He didn't climb, he didn't fight, he rebuilt, not from ambition, but from necessity. This video begins in that same spirit, not with motivation, but with quiet confrontation, with the wreckage we often carry inside, the regrets, the deferments, the habits we stopped noticing because they became our normal. Like Zeno, you may have washed ashore without knowing who you are anymore. But like him, you're still here, and that means something. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You live as if you were destined to live forever." Most men do, until the mirror changes, until the body slows, until the silence gets too loud to ignore. What we call aging often begins not in time, but in habit. Bad habits, quiet, subtle ones. Habits that betray our inner peace. Habits that corrode our presence. Habits that no longer feel like choices, just reflexes. This isn't about skincare or diets. This is about soul posture, emotional aging, the slow loss of clarity, edge, and self-command. So let's be clear, this isn't a video about anti-aging, it's a reflection about anti-wasting. Wasting your breath explaining yourself to people who don't care. Wasting your time in routines that strip your fire. Wasting your dignity in relationships where you've become a ghost. Age in itself is honest, it's noble, but aging in silence, that's often a form of self-inflicted decay. You didn't choose it on purpose, but now you have to choose something else, because this next chapter, it won't be won by force. It'll be reclaimed through clarity, through discipline, through confronting the 11 small hidden habits that have aged you faster than time ever could. This isn't punishment, it's remembrance of who you were, of what you still carry, and of what you no longer have to accept. Let's begin. There comes a moment when you stop feeling and start calculating. You explain away the silence. You justify the distance. You break down your own pain into categories and logic until it doesn't even feel real anymore. That's what overthinking does. That's what rationalizing everything does. It turns your lived experience into a report, a spreadsheet of reasons, a clean chart of emotional damage that never gets felt, only observed. But man doesn't heal through intellect alone. He heals by standing inside what he cannot fix, by honoring what he cannot name. Too many men have confused understanding with mastery. They believe if they can explain their suffering, they've overcome it, but the wound is still there, just buried under language. This habit starts slowly. You notice something off in the relationship, but instead of sitting with the discomfort, you analyze her behavior. You notice you're always tired, but instead of resting, you calculate your productivity. The heart cries out for acknowledgement, and the mind responds with equations. You don't feel anymore. You interpret, you dissect, and in that dissection, something precious bleeds out. Your emotional instincts, your inner compass, your felt reality. All traded in for theories and strategies. But suffering isn't a riddle to solve. It's a message, one you've been ignoring because you've trained yourself to trust logic over truth. Stoicism isn't the suppression of emotion. It's its transformation. It's not about becoming unfeeling. It's about becoming unmoved by things that should no longer govern you. But to get there, you first have to feel, fully, without a chart, without a filter. Over-rationalizing is often just fear. Fear of feeling too much, of being overwhelmed, of losing control. But the irony is this: the more you run from emotion, the more power it gains over you in silence. Like rust on metal, emotional erosion doesn't shout. It accumulates, quietly, until one day your voice doesn't sound like yours anymore. Until your presence feels thin. Until you wake up, not broken, but blank. There's a term in psychology, alexithymia. It means the inability to identify or describe emotions, and it's more common in men than anyone wants to admit. Not because men don't feel, but because they've been trained not to notice, to power through, to stay functional. But you weren't born to be functional. You were born to be whole, and wholeness begins by reclaiming what you've been explaining away. Your anger, your grief, your longing, your shame. Stop trying to solve them. Stand with them. Let them speak. Before they disappear beneath another layer of intellect, you age fast when you stop feeling. Because feeling is where vitality lives, where connection lives, where masculinity renews itself. Not through control, but through conscious containment. Not everything needs an explanation. Some things just need your presence, your breath, your stillness. Because what you won't feel now will harden, and it will follow you. In your voice, in your face, in your fatigue. The mind can be a temple or a tomb, and the difference is whether you allow your heart to be heard inside it. You keep saying you'll get to it. When things slow down, when the chaos subsides, when life finally gives you a moment to breathe, but that moment never comes, and deep down, you know it. The truth is, you're not waiting for calm. You're avoiding confrontation, not with others, but with yourself, with the hard questions, with the boundaries you haven't set, with the silence you've tried to fill by staying busy, useful, agreeable. I'll fix it later. Sounds noble, responsible, but over time it becomes a kind of passive resignation, a quiet surrender dressed as maturity. You've deferred your own healing, your own clarity. You've put it on hold like a forgotten promise. Not because you're weak, but because you thought you were supposed to endure, to wait, to push through. But each delay trains your nervous system to believe that your needs don't matter, that your peace is negotiable, that your voice can always be postponed. And so it is. Over and over again, you tend to others, you fix what you can, you manage everything but yourself, and the world learns, slowly but surely, that you will always wait your turn, even when the line never ends. Stoic strength isn't the absence of emotion or discomfort. It's the refusal to be ruled by delay. Epictetus said that what you delay without reflection becomes your silent master. He wasn't speaking metaphorically. Every time you defer a boundary, you deepen a groove in your psyche, one that whispers, not yet, not now, maybe later. And that voice, left unchecked, becomes your internal compass. You start orienting your life not by what's true or urgent, but by what's convenient to others. That's not Stoicism. That's emotional servitude, and it ages you in ways no mirror can show. Neuroscience confirms it. Chronic stress doesn't just exhaust you, it rewires you. It numbs your instinct to act. It makes avoidance feel like safety. It rewards suppression, and you call it discipline. You call it sacrifice. But what it really is disappearance. You're still here, but not fully. You respond, but you don't initiate. You function, but you don't feel alive, because everything important keeps getting pushed to later, and later has become a graveyard of things you never gave yourself. The pain isn't just that you've delayed, the pain is that you believed you had to, that there would be some perfect season to come back to yourself, but there won't be. Life doesn't slow down, and your clarity won't arrive by accident. It must be claimed, not loudly, not dramatically, but consciously, with breath, with presence, with the quiet courage to say, now. Now I set the boundary. Now I make the cut. Now I rest. Now I begin to listen to the man I've been postponing for years. Because dignity doesn't live in delay. It lives in the moment you stop waiting for permission to heal. You tell yourself you're just being a good man, a provider, a steady presence. You've been trained to say yes before thinking, to show up without being asked, to carry the emotional weight of others without complaint. But somewhere along the line, you stopped asking what it was costing you. Not in money, not in time, in pieces of yourself, in respect, in identity. Because the truth is, when helping becomes your only language, it stops being love. It becomes compensation. It becomes penance. You're not giving from strength anymore. You're giving to stay needed, to stay relevant, to stay safe. There's a certain type of man who gives so much that he disappears. He becomes the silent foundation everyone stands on but no one sees. He's dependable, predictable, and completely exhausted. He doesn't rage. He doesn't blame. He just fades into routines, into usefulness, into a version of himself that feels more like a service than a soul. This isn't generosity. It's self-erasure. And it ages you, not just physically, but spiritually. Because every unreciprocated gesture chips away at your sense of being a man, not just a machine. You may think this is what Stoicism asks of you: to endure, to serve, to expect nothing, but that's not Stoicism, that's martyrdom. True Stoic masculinity is disciplined giving, rooted in clarity, not guilt. It's the wisdom to know when to help and when to hold back, when to offer and when to protect your own flame. Because the man who never says no isn't strong, he's invisible. And invisibility doesn't just come from being ignored by others. It comes from forgetting yourself, from never checking in with what you want, what you need, what you're allowed to keep for yourself. There's a story lived by too many fathers: the man who never said no, who always showed up, who worked late, came home tired, smiled anyway. Until one day, no one noticed when he didn't smile. Until one day, he sat in the same chair at the same time and didn't feel like a man anymore, just a role being played. He thought his sacrifices would earn him peace, but all they earned him was quiet. Not the peaceful kind, the empty kind. Because giving without boundaries doesn't build connection, it builds resentment, slow, hidden, heavy. You are not a resource. You are not a savior. You are not the solution to everyone else's life. You are a man. And that means learning to carry others without dropping yourself. It means saying yes with intention and no without guilt. You don't owe your soul to every person who asks for your time. You don't have to explain why you're tired, why you're done, why you need silence. Those who truly love you will understand, and those who don't never really saw you anyway. Stop giving to be seen. Start holding to be whole. You tell yourself you've earned it. The drink, the scrolling, the late night silence filled with noise, after the long day, after the weight you've carried, after all the demands you didn't refuse. It feels harmless. It feels like recovery, but it isn't. It's delay, disguised as downtime. It's a subtle form of escape that looks like peace from the outside but feels like quiet emptiness on the inside. And over time, that kind of rest doesn't restore you. It drains you further. Not all silence is healing. Some silence is hiding. There's a difference between being still and being sedated. You fall into the couch not because you're relaxed, but because you're spent. Not because you're present, but because you're numb. The remote becomes your ritual. The drink becomes your transition. The background noise becomes the soundtrack of a man who's too tired to feel but too awake to sleep. You scroll, not for content, but for distraction. Not to learn, but to forget. You keep moving your finger while the rest of you slowly forgets how to move at all. And the worst part, no one sees it, because you still show up. You still perform. You still function. But functioning isn't living, and sedating yourself after survival isn't recovery. It's a slow resignation. You're not Sisyphus, endlessly pushing a stone. You're the man sitting beside it, telling yourself this pause is deserved. But this pause is years long, and you haven't really stopped to breathe. You've just stopped feeling. Stoicism teaches stillness, not sedation. It teaches awareness, not avoidance. Rest isn't scrolling through images of lives you're no longer part of. It's presence, it's breath. It's being so still that your soul can catch up to your body again. The most dangerous part of this habit is that it feels innocent. You're not hurting anyone. You're not breaking anything, but you are fading. Slowly, quietly, night after night, one dopamine hit at a time. You lose your edge, your discipline, your presence. And it's not from one decision, it's from thousands of tiny ones. Moments when you could have sat with your discomfort but instead chose to drown it. Moments when you could have gone to bed early, but chose to chase a feeling that never arrived. Moments when you knew you needed stillness, but opted for silence with static. There's nothing wrong with needing rest, but real rest doesn't numb. It reconnects. It doesn't distract. It realigns. If the thing you're calling recovery is actually eroding your clarity, it's not rest. It's a quiet form of despair. And you deserve better than that. You don't have to punish yourself for being tired, but you do have to protect yourself from habits that turn fatigue into forgetting. Because a man who numbs every night eventually forgets what it feels like to be alive during the day. Choose presence, even if it hurts, even if it's quiet, even if it's unfamiliar, because that's the beginning of real restoration, and you are long overdue. There's a cost to silence that no one warns you about. It doesn't just echo in your relationships. It echoes in your body, in your hormones, in your chemistry. When a man stops expressing what he truly feels, his anger, his hunger, his desire, he doesn't just lose his voice, he begins to lose himself. Slowly, quietly, from the inside out. This isn't metaphor. This is biology. A man who swallows his truth every day lowers his testosterone without ever realizing it. A man who lives in emotional compliance raises his cortisol. His body adapts to silence the same way it adapts to trauma, by muting vitality. You think you're being peaceful, cooperative, mature, but your body knows better. Your shoulders tighten, your sleep gets thinner, your drive disappears, your presence fades. Not because you're weak, but because you've over-adapted. You've learned to survive by blending in, by minimizing conflict, by withholding your truth to keep the peace. But peace bought at the expense of your authenticity isn't peace, it's spiritual erosion. And over time, that erosion reaches your bones. Zeno didn't teach in grand speeches. He taught in paradox, in stillness, in contradiction. And one of the greatest paradoxes of masculinity is this: to regain your strength, you must first admit where you gave it away. Not in one moment, but in all the small ones. The ones where you stayed quiet instead of speaking. The ones where you agreed to avoid being abandoned. The ones where you smiled so you wouldn't be seen as angry. Each one seemed small, but together, they rewrote your chemistry. Not your personality, your biology. The body remembers the truth long after the mouth has forgotten how to speak it. You know this. You feel it in your low energy, in your foggy focus, in the weight that won't lift even after rest. You think you're tired, but you're not just tired. You're silenced, and that silence is costing you more than sleep. It's costing you drive, fire, testosterone, presence, the very things that make you feel like a man, not in dominance, but in grounded, anchored clarity. And here's what no one says. You don't need to shout. You don't need to make noise. You just need to speak again. Not to be validated, but so your body remembers you still exist. So your nervous system stops bracing for rejection. So your chemistry remembers how to wake up. Speak your truth. Not to hurt, not to fix, just to remember, to reconnect. Because the longer you stay quiet, the more you teach your body that your truth isn't safe. And over time, that message becomes your baseline, until there's nothing left but a shell, a man with strength but no center, with answers but no voice. You were not made to be silent. You were made to be still, and stillness is not the absence of expression, it's the fullness of it, held with discipline, released with clarity. Speak, not loudly, not often, but truthfully, so that your blood remembers, so that your bones remember, so that your chemistry realigns with the man you used to be, before silence taught you to disappear. Most men carry belief systems like old coats, once protective, now just heavy. You built your identity on ideas that made sense when you were younger, when you needed certainty, when the world still felt like something to conquer, but you're not that man anymore. And yet, the code you live by hasn't changed. You still operate by rules you never chose, only inherited. Rules that once gave you strength but now quietly suffocate you. And the irony? You think staying loyal to them is integrity, but what it really is stagnation. What served you at 25 might be strangling you at 45. The idea that emotion equals weakness, that sacrifice equals love, that silence equals peace. These beliefs may have helped you survive one version of life, but they're not helping you live this one. And yet, you cling to them, not because they're still true, but because you've never been taught how to update your inner system without shame. Because no one ever said, you're allowed to outgrow who you used to be. You thought change meant betrayal, that questioning your philosophy meant collapse. But the real collapse is happening in the shadows, quietly, slowly, as your outdated beliefs drain your presence one decision at a time. A man without a living philosophy becomes a man ruled by other people's expectations. He becomes predictable, malleable, always adapting to fit, never grounding to stand. He might look composed on the outside, but inside, he's drifting, not because he lacks will, but because he lacks permission. Permission to rewrite, to reframe, to reclaim. Stoicism doesn't ask you to stay rigid. It asks you to stay conscious. It asks you to examine, to edit, to evolve. Because what is philosophy, if not the ongoing discipline of asking, is this still true for me? There's a kind of man who lives by borrowed codes. He quotes discipline but runs from reflection. He speaks of leadership but never leads himself inward. He wakes up every day and performs the version of masculinity that was handed to him, without ever asking what it's costing him now. And over time, that performance turns to exhaustion. He begins to feel like a fraud, not because he's lying, but because he's outdated. He hasn't allowed himself to change. He hasn't dared to write a new truth. But you can. You must. Because if you don't, you'll continue to age in the worst way, internally, silently, unnecessarily. You'll keep choosing sacrifice over sovereignty, obedience over authenticity, until the only thing left of you is the image of a man who once believed. Your beliefs should not be prisons. They should be portals. Places to walk through, places to grow from. The moment you begin to question, not in rebellion, but in reverence, is the moment you begin to rebuild. Stoic renewal isn't loud. It isn't sudden. It's a quiet confrontation in the mirror. It's sitting with yourself and asking, what part of me is still true, and what part needs to be laid to rest? Not everything you were taught was wrong, but not everything still belongs. And the man you are now deserves a philosophy that can hold him, not just instruct him. Strip it down, rebuild it, not to be new, but to be real. Because the older you get, the more sacred your truth must become. And nothing ages a man faster than pretending he still believes what he no longer feels. You think it's just bad posture, just tight shoulders, just a little stiffness when you rise in the morning. But your body isn't just aging, it's remembering. It's remembering every moment you stayed quiet when you should have spoken, every time you swallowed your truth, every time you walked back into a room that drained you. Your body doesn't forget. It stores what your voice never released. The slumped shoulders aren't laziness, they're emotional fatigue. The shallow breath isn't weakness, it's restraint. The slow gait isn't just age, it's the weight of words unspoken, boundaries never drawn, pain never honored. Men often carry their stories in their backs, their necks, their jaws. You clench not just from stress, but from history, from old conversations that never ended, from arguments you rehearsed but never had, from grief that went unspoken because strength meant silence. You thought you moved on, you thought you let it go, but your body didn't. It stored the tension, it recorded the cost, and now even when you want to rest, you can't, because the body doesn't lie, and it will keep telling the truth until you finally listen. There is science behind this, neuroscience. Trauma reshapes the nervous system. Chronic regret rewires breath, tension, movement. You live in a body molded by decisions you didn't even know you were making. And yet, there's a kind of quiet wisdom in that, because if the body holds memory, it can also hold healing. But healing won't come from pushing harder. It comes from becoming conscious, from noticing the weight before it turns into collapse, from giving your body a different kind of message, one that says, you don't have to carry this anymore. Zeno walked the streets of Athens in silence before founding Stoicism, not in retreat, in reflection, in awareness, in a kind of embodied presence that allowed philosophy to rise from his bones, not just his mind. Sometimes walking differently is the first rebellion. Sometimes lifting your head is the first boundary. Sometimes standing still with your shoulders back is the first time your body tells the world, I remember who I am. This isn't about posture correction, it's about presence correction. About re-entering your body not as a machine to be fixed, but as a home to be reclaimed. Check in, not just with your mind, with your breath, with the way you sit, with the way you clench when no one is watching. These aren't flaws. These are messages, invitations, to come back to yourself, to stop performing calm and actually start feeling peace. You don't need to explain anything. You don't need to analyze. You just need to notice, to feel, to respect the body that kept going when your soul had paused. Because the moment you realign your presence is the moment time begins to slow, not because life changed, but because you did. And that's where aging begins to reverse. Not in years, but in dignity, in stillness, in command. You're not here to reverse time. That was never the point. You're here to stop feeding what quietly ages your spirit, the habits, the silence, the delays. You came here thinking this was a list of bad routines, but what it really is a map back to yourself. You are not aging because of time alone. You are aging because of repetition, of neglect, of small daily betrayals to your own clarity. But clarity can return, and when it does, so does power. Not the kind that dominates, the kind that commands, without noise, without effort, without asking for anything. Zenão de Sitio lost everything. He stood on the shores of a shipwreck with nothing left to offer the world, and from that loss, philosophy was born, not in a moment of triumph, in the ashes, in the aftermath, in the silence that followed devastation. That's where authority begins, not in success, but in self-reclamation. You've had your wrecks, you've had your quiet endings, but you're still here, and that means something. It means your philosophy isn't finished. It means your presence still has weight. It means there is still something sacred left to restore. Seneca once said, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it." Every one of these habits is a leak, a slow bleed, a soft unraveling that doesn't make noise, but robs you of years. And manhood isn't measured by how long you avoid breaking. It's measured by how deeply you return after you've been broken, by how much of yourself you retrieve after you've been scattered. This isn't about being untouched. It's about being undeniable, quiet, present, fully here. And so close your eyes for a moment. Picture your 70-year-old self, not bitter, not empty, but whole. Not because life was easy, but because somewhere in the middle of the wreckage, you stopped bleeding from unnoticed cuts. You stopped performing resilience and started choosing it. You didn't need applause. You didn't need a comeback story. You just needed silence, intention, a new rhythm, and you found it, not by running, but by staying still long enough to hear yourself again. And now, you know, every moment you interrupt these habits is a moment you interrupt the slow death of your inner command. Not through rebellion, but through remembering, through a new kind of strength, the one that doesn't ask for permission, the one that simply walks, quietly, firmly. Now,